Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we will continue with the Salesforce Developer Interview Question and Answer series. Today, we will discuss part 10 video where I will be discussing Batch Apex. Again, Batch Apex is part of the Asynchronous Apex series. This is the third video in the Asynchronous Apex series. It is a continuation video. If you have not watched previous videos of this series, then I strongly recommend you to watch those first. So let's get started. Asynchronous Apex. Okay, again, as I said, this is the continuation video, third video of the Asynchronous Apex series, and the topic is Batch Apex. So the very first question we have over here is, what is a Batch Apex? Okay, so basically Batch Apex is again one of the asynchronous features or type. In the previous videos, I think we have discussed feature method, and in this video we will be discussing Batch Apex. Okay, this is again one of the asynchronous Apex features. So Batch Apex is used to run the large jobs. Like think about the thousands of millions of records that would be exceeded normal processing limits. Okay, you might ask, okay, why do we need to have a separate thing called Batch Apex to run the thousands of millions of records? Why can't we use the regular Apex classes, right? So that would be a question to the new candidates or to the new students or the people who are coming to Salesforce from a different technology, right? So the problem, this is not a problem actually. This feature is because of its core, architecture called multi-tenant architecture. Okay, I'm not sure if you have watched all my videos. If you go back to my Salesforce administrator interview question and answer series, I think the first video of that series, I have explained about multi-tenant architecture, right? Just to give you a little bit background, multi-tenant architecture is where, we have one org and then multiple different companies use that org. Okay, and then not org but the server, I would say, and each and every company should equally utilize the resources, or no one should monopolize the resources. So that is the reason Salesforce have added some limits called governor limits. Okay, and to adhere to those governor limits, as well as to work on the large number of data, we have a solution called Batch Apex. Okay, so Batch Apex is again doing two things. It is one, it is adhering to Salesforce governor limits by dividing the large number of data into smaller batches. Okay, and then second, it is also benefited to the end, to the customers, in running the large amount of data. Okay, so if you remember one of the governor limits, I can select only 50,000 records at a time, right? And I can update only 1,000 records at a time. So that is the governor limit. So now the companies wants to process, large chunk of data. They want to update their whole customer database. Okay, so how can you do that? If you limit the customers to just update 1,000 at a time, it is a problem, right? Enterprise customers will have millions of customers. So to solve that problem, Salesforce is having Batch Apex, wherein you have to program, or you have to write how many millions of records you want to process, and batch will do rest of the thing. Okay, for example, if you have a batch of 1 million records, batch will take all those 1 million records, but it will divide the data into, let's say, 2,000 records and process 2,000 records at a time. Okay, so that is the background of Batch Apex. That is why we need the Batch Apex. If you are in an interview, try to explain them, giving them all these examples, that will be more impressive to the interviewer. Cool. So let's understand the next point. Using Batch Apex, we can process records asynchronously. Again, I have discussed this asynchronously. Asynchronously means it will not be immediate. Okay, all the Batch Apex will execute on its own time. Okay, whenever the resources are available, that time this Batch Apex batches will be, executed. Okay. Hence the name batch apex. So using batch apex, we can process records asynchronously in the batches. I mean, for example, I'll give you a small example. If I have 10,000 records, it will divide the 10,000 records into 2,000 batch of 2,000. Okay. So how many? 5 batches. It will create 5 batches, and hence the name came as batch apex to stay within the platform limits. This is important. Okay. If you have a lot of records to process, for example, data cleansing or archiving, batch apex is probably the solution. Okay. Next question is, how do we use a batch apex? Okay. So to use a batch apex, write an apex class that implements the Salesforce provided interface called database.batchable. As soon as you write an interface which implements an interface called database.batchable, it becomes the batch apex. And as soon as you implement database.batchable, then you have to adhere to some requirements of that batch. I mean to say that you cannot write the that apex class in whatever way you want. Okay. So now you will be restricted. Okay. Like, so and so method should be written. So and so method should be compulsory in that batchable apex. Okay. And then invoke the class programmatically. Let's see what are those, things which we have to adhere if we use database.batchable. Okay. So this is the format, like, when we write a normal class, we write public class, some class, right? So for the batchable class, we have to write public class. This can be, again, whatever name you want. I have just written an example called public class batch class, which implements. This is important. As soon as you write implements database.batchable, then it becomes a batch class. Okay. So why do we implement database.batchable interface, or what happens when we implement database.batchable interface? So as soon as we write database.batchable interface, what will happen? Okay. So database.batchable interface contains 3 methods that must be implemented. Okay. That must be implemented. You cannot ignore any one of that method. You have to implement all those three methods. Okay. So first one is a start method. You have to implement this. Second one is an execute method. You have to implement this as well. And then finish method. Okay. So these 3 methods are mandatory if we use database.batchable interface. If we do not implement any of these 3 methods, then the class throws an error. Okay. So go back and just write a class, write a database.batchable interface, and try to implement only two methods, start and execute, and try to save it. Automatically you will see an error that you have to implement the last method, that is finish method, as well. Okay. This class, as soon as you write database.batchable, it will not allow you to even save that class. Okay. Cool. Let's go to next question. Can you explain about 3 methods of that batch apex? So now we have to explain those 3 methods, what each method does exactly. Okay. So the start method, it is used to collect the records of the objects to pass to the interface. See, I told you, right? I have just explained you that if you want to process like 10,000, a small example, we can process millions of records, but let's take, as an example, 10,000 records. So this start method will run a query and get all those 10,000 records at a time. Okay. And keep it with that method. Okay. Let's see, what it does after getting all the records in the later method. Okay. But for now, let's suppose start method will just extract all those records which we need to process. Okay. So it is used to collect the records of the object to pass to the interface method execute. So it will extract all the records with a query. Okay. Probably. And then pass it to the execute methods. You don't have to interfere in this method. Okay. It will do by anything by itself and everything by itself. Okay. So let me repeat again. It is used to collect the records of objects to pass to the interface method execute. Call the start method at the beginning of the batch apex job. Okay. You have to write the start method at the beginning of the batch apex job. So this method returns either a database.queryLocator object or an iterable that contains the records, or objects passed to the job. So there are two different things. Don't worry about it right now. Okay, we'll discuss it later. But there are two ways to get the data in the start methods. First way is database.queryLocator, and then second one is iterable. Okay. So for now, just think that we have two ways. What are the two ways? We can go into it later on. And the second method is execute method. It is used to do the required processing for each chunk of data. Okay, this is the main method where where your actual job will process or will divide the records and do its processing. Okay, this method is called for each batch of records that you pass to it. Okay, batches of the records tends to execute in the order in which they have received from the start method. Okay, however, the order in which the batch or records execute depends on the various factors. Okay, so it is saying that it executes in the order which it received, but it does also have many other factors to process in that sequence. Okay, the order of execution isn't guaranteed, so you should not write your logic in such a way thinking that okay, it will process the records in a particular sequence. Okay, no, so your logic should not be dependent. Your logic should be independent of the sequence. Okay. The final method is the finish method. This method is called after all the batches are processed, and it can be used to send confirmation emails or execute post-processing operations. Okay. You have to, even though you have to implement this finish method, but I have seen a lot where best practices has not been followed. I mean, sometimes, big companies also, the engineers or the developers from the big companies, even though they follow best practices, but I've seen many a time that, people, they will, even though they write them finish method, but they don't implement anything in the finish method. Okay. Generally, this method is used to send the notification to whoever it is, to say that the batch has been processed. And you can also give the details like, from this batch contains so many so and so records, and from those so and so records, this many records have been processed and this many have been failed. Okay, you can do that. Okay, so finish method is also a compulsory method. Even though if you don't have anything to write, you still have to implement it. Cool. So let's go to the next question. Can you write a sample batch Apex? So this is really frequent. Okay, you have to first understand the structure of the batch Apex. Okay, don't go without practicing the structure of the batch Apex. Okay, even though you don't, sometimes, many times, I mean, the interviewer is not expecting you to write the 100% correct answer, correct, batch Apex class, but at least he want to see the right structure. Okay, so that is the reason I have given this question here, and it will be asked. So again, public class, my batch class implements database.batchable. So the interviewer will look into each of these things. Okay, these are all mandatory things. If interviewer is asking you to write, you have to write all these things compulsory. Okay, practice it, by heart it, whatever it is. Okay, so the one which I put in the comments are not so important. I mean, it is important, but even if you have done some mistake over here, which is fine. Okay, here, like process each batch, whatever the code, if for example, if he has given you an example to write, process some 10 maybe 10,000 batches, wherein you are updating from status from in progress to maybe completed, right? So you can write the pseudo code on those lines, but yeah, I mean, it is still okay if you have done some slight mistake, because right, when we write the code is different than when we write on a editor where we know that okay, this syntax is wrong and all those things. But these whatever I have written, these 11 lines are compulsory. You have to by heart it. Okay, public database.queryLocator, you have to use either this or this, not two at a time. Okay, and then the start method starts, and then database.batchable context and the variable bc. Cool. And then you implement whatever query, whatever you have in this one. And the second method is public void execute, again database.batchable context bc, list p, and then records, again whatever you are implementing over here, which is fine. public void finish database dot batchable context BC, and then execute whatever final whatever you want to write in the finish method. You practice the whole batch apex, but focus on these three methods. I mean, try to be try to buy hard or try to practice more so that you remember these three things. Okay, cool. Let's go to the next question. Explain about database.query locator in the batch apex. So this is the most widely used, okay, when compared to database.query locator and iterable. I've seen database.query locator in most of the cases, but you will know like when to use what. Okay, so database.query locator can be used for simple query like select statement to generate the scope of the objects in the object batch job. Okay, so for example, this is in the scenario where you have got a requirement saying that take all the opportunities in the system and update the opportunities from in progress to 1. Okay, whatever. Okay, then in that scenario select statement will still work. If you have given a scenario wherein you were asked to update all the accounts, okay, accounts with some status, okay, I don't know, okay, it could be any field, not just the status, but any field. Okay, so you will still use database.query locator. Okay, let's move on. I will explain you why we use database.iterable in the next question. So with database.query locator, the governor limits for the total number of records retrieved by SOQL queries is bypass. So you will not have that limit of 50,000 records. If you go back to the governor limits and check, there is a limit of 50,000 records in a SOQL query, right? If you write a SOQL query, it should retrieve only 50,000 records. But with this query locator, it will be bypassed. Okay. So when using the query locator, the maximum number of records can be retrieved is up to 50 million. Okay. So it is up to 50 million records you can retrieve from the query locator. Cool. Now next go to the next question. Explain about the iterable in the batch apex. So this is the other version, right? Iterable. So iterable is used when we have to create a more complex scope for the batch job. Okay, what is the more complex scope? Let's see here. Example, if the batch class needs to operate on a data obtained from two unrelated objects, okay, then we can create a custom iterable class and return combined data from both objects as a list of iterable from start method. Okay, what example should I give here? Let's suppose you have I would say a batch wherein you want to retrieve data from an account object and maybe some other custom object. Both are not connected, means they don't have any relationship. Okay, so in those situations you can use iterable. Okay, so you will also get a question, interview question. I'm not sure if I have covered this, like what is the difference between query locator and iterable. Okay, so if you have got that question, then now you are really clear. Okay, right, what you have to tell to the interviewer. Cool. Next one is with iterable we can pass both the objects or records to the execute method for processing. Okay, we can either pass objects. For the other one I think we can pass on the objects, but for this we can pass the objects as well as records to the execute method for processing. With iterable, the governor limits for the total number of records retrieved by SOQL queries is still enforced, which is up to 50,000, right? So that is the reason I said iterable is very rarely used. Okay, only in the situations where a direct query is not at all working, then only iterable is used, right? So what is the usage of iterable if we can just use 50,000 records? Okay, we can still go with the regular class, right? But we can go for a scheduled class as well, right? So it depends. How to invoke a batch class. Now that you know what is a batch class, what are the different methods of the batch class, what methods you have to write, what are the mandatory methods, and what are the I mean, there is no non-mandatory methods, but now we have to see how can we invoke the batch class. So to invoke a batch class, simply instantiate it and then call database.execute batch with the instance. Let's see the example. So I have given my batch class. This is the name, my batch class. My batch object is equals to new my batch class, and then ID, the batch ID is equals to database.execute my batch object. Okay. So basically you have to write the name of the class and then variable of the class name. Okay. Variable of the class is equals to new, again name of the class. Once you get that, ID is equals to batch ID. ID batch ID, you have to declare an ID called batch ID. ID variable. This is the variable batch ID is equals to database.execute batch, and then you have to pass on this class name variable over here. Okay. Optionally, we can pass a second scope parameter to specify the number of records that should be passed into execute method for each batch. Okay. So because this is a batch class, right? I said that it will divide the data into batches. Like why it will divide 2000 or why it will divide 200, right? So for that we have something called a scope parameter. Okay. So ID batch ID is equals to database.execute batch my batch object, comma, same thing, everything is same, but we can add comma, and then you will write scope. Okay. If you write the scope, then it will divide the batches into these many records. Okay. Next question is, can we track the progress of the batch job? Okay. So yes, each batch Apex invocation creates an asynchronous Apex job record. This is an object. Okay. This is a system object. Go and check out this object. Okay. It is there. Go and check each of these fields. Okay. So the details of the batch will be there in this object. Cool. So each batch Apex invocation creates an Apex async Apex job record so that we can track the job's progress. Cool. So we can view the progress via socle or manage your job in Apex job queue. So asynchronous job is equals to select ID, comma, status, comma, job processed, comma, total job items, comma, number of errors from asynchronous job where ID is equals to batch ID. So this is what I was saying, right? So you can use this query in the final method, and then you can show to the or send an email to the whoever it is, administrator or any concerned person, and then say that okay, this is what the number of errors we have in this job. Okay. So this is how we can track. You have to go to from the UI. You have to go to setup and then jobs, and then Apex jobs. Then you will see this screen. Okay, like setup, job, and then Apex jobs, and then you will see this queue. Okay, so that's all for this video. And again, as I said, I am always referring the latest and greatest details from the help.salesforce.com, mostly help.salesforce.com. You can also go and explore that. And thanks for watching this video. I hope this video helped you prepare for your Salesforce developer interview and crack your next job. Thank you.